Welcome back to Talk Tickers, the show where we break down earnings calls like nobody else. All right, today we're diving into Proto Labs Q4 2024 report. And I got to say, it's a pretty interesting one. They're really shaking things up in the manufacturing world.
Yeah, it's definitely a fascinating time for Proto Labs. They built their reputation on speed, rapid prototyping, getting those designs turned around quickly. But now they're making a big push into production manufacturing. It's a bold move trying to become a one-stop shop for their customers' entire product lifecycle.
Right, like you go from that initial prototype to a full-scale production run all with one company. That's the vision they're laying out. But the big question is, can they actually pull it off? Let's see what their Q4 numbers tell us.
Well, first off, they did beat analysts' expectations for the quarter, which is always a good sign. But their overall revenue growth for the year wasn't quite as strong as some had hoped. They brought in $121.8 million for the quarter, which is down 3.1% year over year.
Okay, so a little dip in revenue. How about profits? That's got to be the big concern, right?
Well, that's where things get interesting. Their gross margins actually improved despite that revenue dip, which suggests they're managing costs really well and squeezing more profit out of each dollar they earn.
So they're making less money overall, but they're keeping a bigger chunk of what they're making. I mean, does that sense, is that a good thing?
It definitely can be. Think of it like this. You have two lemonade stands. One sells a ton of lemonade, but they're spending a fortune on lemons and sugar. The other sells a little less lemonade, but keeps their costs super low. The second stand might actually be making more profit, even though they have less revenue. It's all about efficiency.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So higher margins, even though revenue is down, that's a point in their favor for sure. What else should we know about their financial situation?
Well, they're in a very strong position overall. They generated a ton of cash flow last year, almost $78 million from operations. And get this, they have zero debt. So that gives them a lot of flexibility to invest in this new growth strategy, even if it means maybe taking a little hit to their earnings in the short term.
And speaking of investments, they are pouring a lot of resources into this whole production manufacturing push, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is their first full year operating under this new organizational structure. They've completely revamped things. They're really trying to accelerate their growth in this new market. So they've reorganized their sales and marketing teams to really focus on those production customers. And they're rolling out all sorts of new tools and processes to try to streamline things like, quoting for production runs. They want to make it easier for customers to work with them.
Okay, so they're walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Yeah.
That's good. But let's be real here. There are some challenges they're facing.
Oh, for sure. The manufacturing sector as a whole kind of hit a rough patch in 2024. There was a bit of a contraction, and that definitely had an impact on Proto Labs, especially their traditional prototyping business. On top of that, we've got those global supply chain disruptions. Still a big wild card.
It feels like supply chain issues are just the theme of every earnings call these days. But are they doing anything specific to navigate those challenges? Or are they just kind of riding it out?
They're actually trying to turn it into a positive character. They're using their global network of manufacturers to help their customers find alternative sourcing solutions. Helping them find the parts they need even when things are tough to get.
Okay, so they're trying to make lemonade out of lemons, so to speak. But at the end of the day, their success really hinges on this big bet on production manufacturing, right?
Exactly. That's where they're putting their chips. They're counting on growth in their production business to kind of offset the slowdown in prototyping and drive that overall revenue higher.
So big changes, big investments, a bit of a gamble. What are they saying about their expectations for the future? Like, are they optimistic?
Well, their guidance for Q1 2025 is a bit cautious. They're projecting another revenue decline. They're saying it's because of the continuing weakness in the manufacturing sector and a slower start to the year, but they are expecting to return to growth later in the year.
It sounds like they're playing the long game here. They're willing to accept some short-term pain to try to build a foundation for what they believe will be a much bigger business down the road.
Yeah, that's the message their CEO, Rob Bodor, is putting out there. He's basically saying, look, we're investing now to grow revenue because that's ultimately what drives earnings growth. They're focused on the bigger picture, and they think the strategic shift is the key to achieving it.
All right, so we've got a company in transition, making a bold move into a new market with a long-term vision. So what stood out to you the most from this first look at their Q4 report?
I think it's the tension between their short-term performance and their long-term ambitions. It's really interesting. They're taking a hit now, investing heavily, facing some headwinds, but they seem to have this unshakable belief that this production push is the right move for the future.
Yeah, it's that classic short-term pain for long-term gain situation. But the question is, will it pay off?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to answer that, we need to dig a little deeper into the specifics of their strategy, their financials, and the competitive landscape they're facing.
You read my mind. That's exactly what we're going to do. We're just getting started on this deep dive into Proto Labs. We'll be back in a moment to break down their financials in more detail, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to Talk Tickers, where we're taking a deep dive into Proto Labs' recent earnings call and their ambitious push into the world of production manufacturing. It's a move that has the potential to really shake things up, not just for the company, but for the entire manufacturing industry.
They're definitely not afraid to make bold moves, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. We talked about their overall revenue and those impressive gross margins. But let's zoom in on some of the specifics and see what's really driving those results.
Okay, so their Q4 revenue came in at $121.8 million, which, as we mentioned, is down a little bit from last year. Now, a chunk of that revenue comes from what they call the Proto Labs network.
The Proto Labs network, remind me what that is exactly.
It's basically a platform that connects customers with a wider network of manufacturers. It kind of expands Proto Labs' reach beyond their own in-house production facilities, so they can offer a broader range of manufacturing capabilities and really cater to those diverse customer needs.
So they're like a matchmaker for manufacturers and customers.
Exactly. And this network is actually showing some real promise. Their network revenue jumped to $26.5 million in Q4. That's a 17.7% increase year over year.
Okay, so that part of their business is definitely gaining traction. It seems like this network model could be a key piece of their growth strategy, especially as they dive deeper into this whole production manufacturing push.
It has a ton of potential. Now let's talk about those impressive gross margins. For Q4, their consolidated non-GAAP gross margin was 43.4%.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around gross margins. Can you give us a quick refresher on why that number is so important?
Sure. Gross margin basically tells you how much profit a company is making on each dollar of revenue after they deduct the direct costs of producing their goods or services. So a higher gross margin generally means the company is running a tighter ship, they're more efficient, and they're squeezing more profit out of each sale.
Got it. So in Proto Labs' case, their improving gross margins suggest they're doing a good job managing their production costs, even as they're ramping up these investments in their new strategy.
Right. And what's even more impressive is their full-year consolidated non-GAAP gross margin actually went up by 50 basis points to 45.2%.
Wait, hold on. What's a basis point again?
Sorry, financial jargon can be tricky. Sometimes a basis point is just 1/100th of a percentage point, so 50 basis points means their gross margin increased by half a percentage point.
Okay, so not a massive jump,
Okay.
but still a good sign.
Yeah.
Especially considering their revenue was down a bit for the year.
Right. They actually achieved this margin improvement by optimizing both their factory and their network fulfillment processes. Their factory gross margin jumped by 90 basis points, and their network margin increased by a whopping 230 basis points.
Wow, that's a big jump in network margins. What's driving that improvement?
Well, they're getting better at leveraging that network of manufacturers. They're negotiating better rates and streamlining their processes so they can offer competitive pricing to customers while still maintaining those healthy margins for themselves.
Smart move.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're really starting to figure out this whole hybrid model of in-house production and network fulfillment.
Definitely. And remember, they served over 52,000 customer contacts in 2024. Even with that slight dip in overall revenue, they still managed to grow their revenue per customer by 3% year over year.
So they're doing more business with each customer, even if they're not adding tons of new customers. It's got to be a good sign, right?
It suggests they're attracting the right kind of customers, the ones who are willing to spend more and really engage with their services. Now let's talk about cash flow. They generated almost $78 million in cash from operations last year.
Cash flow. Why is that so important?
Cash flow is the lifeblood of any business. It's the actual cash coming in and going out. Strong cash flow gives companies the flexibility to invest, pay dividends, handle tough economic times, and just generally operate more smoothly.
So basically, Proto Labs' strong cash flow means they can keep investing in this new production push, even if it means they have to give up some short-term profits.
Exactly. And don't forget they have zero debt, which gives them even more breathing room financially. They're in a really good spot from a cash flow perspective.
Okay, so healthy margins, strong cash flow, no debt. Sounds like they're in a great position. But their guidance for Q1 2025 is a little bit cautious.
Yeah, they're projecting revenue between $120 million and $128 million for the first quarter, which would be another decline year over year.
They're blaming that on the weak manufacturing sector and the slow start to the year. But they're also planning to really ramp up their operating expenses to fuel all those marketing and sales initiatives we talked about.
Yep. They're basically saying we're going to take a short-term hit to earnings to position ourselves for that long-term growth. It's a classic move, but there's always a risk involved.
So they're going all in on this production push, and they're willing to ride out some bumps in the road to get there. It's a risky move for sure.
It is. But Proto Labs has never been afraid to shake things up. They've always been innovators and they've taken risks before. The next few quarters will be really interesting to see if this gamble pays off.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about the bigger picture here. If Proto Labs pulls this off, it could signal a pretty big shift in the entire manufacturing landscape, don't you think?
Definitely. They're challenging the way things have always been done. The long lead times, the high minimum order quantities, all that. Their vision, if it works, could make on-demand production something that's accessible and affordable for companies of all sizes.
That could really change the game for smaller businesses that want to bring new products to market faster. And even for bigger companies that need to be more responsive to changing demands. It could even make supply chains more resilient and diversified.
Exactly. It's an exciting possibility. But of course, there are challenges. Proto Labs needs to execute flawlessly, build trust with those new customers, and keep innovating to stay ahead of the curve.
They need to show that they can really scale their production to meet all those different needs, from those highly specialized parts to larger production runs. And they need to make sure their sales and marketing are really on point to attract those new customers, especially the ones looking for production solutions.
And maybe most importantly, they have to maintain that same speed, quality, and customer service that they're known for in prototyping as they move into this more complex world of production. That's a big challenge.
So a lot to prove and a lot at stake. It'll be really interesting to see how this all unfolds.
Definitely Proto Labs is a company on a mission, and they're trying to rewrite the rules of manufacturing. The next few quarters will be crucial to see if their gamble pays off.
Okay, well, let's wrap up this deep dive into Proto Labs' Q4 report and their journey into the world of production manufacturing.
Thanks for joining us as we explored their transformation and what it could mean for the manufacturing industry. This is just the beginning of their journey.
And no Talk Tickers deep dive would be complete without our This Is Not Financial Advice segment, where we let our imaginations run wild with a crazy but maybe plausible trade idea.
What do you have for us today?
Okay, hear me out. What if Proto Labs took this whole on-demand production thing to the next level and launched a subscription service?
Interesting. Tell me more.
Okay, so picture this Proto Labs Prime, a monthly subscription that gives companies access to their entire suite of manufacturing capabilities. Need a batch of custom parts? No problem. Hit up your Proto Labs Prime account, upload your design, and boom, parts are on their way.
You're thinking big, but I gotta say it's not completely out there. It fits perfectly with their vision of being that one-stop shop for everything production, and it could open up a whole new market for them.
Right. It could be huge for smaller companies that need that on-demand production but can't handle those big-scale runs. And for Proto Labs, it could create a recurring revenue stream which would make their business model even more stable and predictable.
Proto Labs Prime. I kind of like the sound of that.
Right. It's just crazy enough to work. All right, folks, that's our This Is Not Financial Advice segment for today. But keep your eye on Proto Labs. They're on a mission, and their journey could really reshape the future of manufacturing as we know it. So we've been talking about Proto Labs and their big push into production manufacturing. It's a bold move, and the next few quarters will be crucial for them.
Yeah, no doubt. They're really trying to change the game, and investors seem to be buying into their vision. Their stock price has been climbing, even though their revenue took a dip in the short term.
Investors are definitely betting on the long game here. But as we've said, there are some big challenges ahead. They need to prove they can scale up their production, maintain their high standards, and attract those new customers.
And they've got to do all that while dealing with supply chain issues and a slowdown in the manufacturing sector. It's a lot to juggle.
It is. But Proto Labs has always been an innovator. They've been pushing boundaries in digital manufacturing for years, and they're not afraid to take risks and try new things.
One thing that could really help them is their global network of manufacturers. That gives them a lot of flexibility and reach.
Yeah, it lets them offer a wider range of production capabilities and tap into specialized expertise.
Right.
They're not limited to just their own in-house production.
Right. And it gives them some resilience, too. They can adapt to changing market conditions more easily, shift production if they need to, and find solutions to those supply chain headaches.
And remember our This Is Not Financial Advice segment. We talk about how they could even launch a subscription service based on that network.
Proto Labs Prime, right?
Exactly. Companies could pay a monthly fee to access their whole manufacturing ecosystem. It's like on-demand production on steroids.
It would definitely be a game changer, especially for smaller companies that need that flexibility but don't have the resources for huge production runs.
And for Proto Labs, it would create a more stable revenue stream. It's a win-win.
So a lot of potential upside for Proto Labs, but they need to execute.
Execution is everything. They've got a great vision. Now they need to make it a reality.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Proto Labs.
We've talked about their financials, their strategy, the challenges they're facing, and the opportunities that lie ahead.
They're a company in transition, and they're betting big on their ability to transform manufacturing. The next few quarters will be very telling.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Proto Labs. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure dissecting this earnings call with you.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of business and finance. Until then, keep those stock tickers ticking and stay curious.